Here's the deal. Let me. Some of you guys know me. Some of you guys know me very well. We got a bunch of people on Zoom. They know me. And so I came today when I was 31 years old. I'm 75 now, and I've been. So I'm in my 44th year of sobriety, and I've married for almost 44 years. You know, my sponsor said, "Don't make any major moves during your first year, major decisions." And so I got married after I had 3 months. I didn't think it was a big deal. I was mistaken. I should have listened to my sponsor, but it's too late now. You know, I mean, with 4 kids and 8 grandkids, you know, that's the deal. So I'm going to talk a little bit about me. My sponsor said, you got to stop thinking about yourself. It's not all about you. And I said, well, how do I do this? He said, you got to talk about yourself. I said, I was trying to figure that out and get that, you know. I was always talking about other people, this guy and that guy. And he says, no, you got to talk about yourself. Then you'll be able to get out of yourself. Go figure. There's a lot of things in AA that are hard to figure out. You got to learn the jargon, you know what I mean? So I've been through I don't want to say I've been through all the phases. You understand? Because I'm not dead yet. There's probably a few phases after. You know, like, it's like a child growing up. I'll probably repeat myself a little. There's nothing wrong with repeating yourself in Alcoholics Anonymous. Sometimes we need repetition. That's why we read the same stuff over and over again. I have a workshop that we do on Saturday. It's a 3.5-hour workshop. We get a lot of people there, and for the first hour we play music. We just play music. It's gospel stuff and hymns and stuff for the first hour. And I have people constantly coming up to me. You know, I was scared. I woke up in the middle of the night scared, and I started thinking about that song, Faith is the Victory. I've had like 3 or 4 people say to that. You know, sometimes you hear something over and over and over again, and it wipes out the chatter of the chatter of your mind and the chatter of the what do you call those things that Bill Wilson called those things? The worldly clamors. Has anybody here ever experienced the worldly clamors? Son of a bitch, they never stop, do they? You know? It doesn't matter that you're going to meetings, you walk outside and there's the worldly clamors again. They're like all over the place, you know, and so I've been doing this thing for a while, and, you know, it's like when a person grows up, you know, you start off as like an infant, and then when you become, what's after an infant? That's like a toddler. And then what's after a toddler? You're like a child until you're like 10 or 11, 12. Then you become a teenager, you know? We got all that stuff in AA, you know? And then you become a young adult, you know? And at that point, nobody's dying. We just want shit. We just want, you know, we want stuff. And you become a young adult and you're looking for stuff, and you run around looking for stuff. And then after young adult? You become like a middle-aged. What's that? Like from 30 to 45, 50 years old. And then, I don't know, what happens after 35, 50? Then I don't know, I feel like I want to, it's like a little bit senior. And then you become like, you know, my deal, ready for the assisted living facility. Yeah, boom. I don't know what I am. I go to a group at 12 o'clock almost every day, and group of men my age or older. Not too many people older, but, you know, and they've been around for 20, 30 years, and everybody's got cancer, but it's an interesting group. It's a wonderful group. Nobody complains. They just talk about stuff that you probably would never hear at the AA readings you go to. You know, there's no complaints. People have cancer every once in a while. The other day, I said, where's Steve? And they say, oh, he died last night. Yeah, terminal cancer. He died. I said, I didn't even know he was sick. You know, that's an interesting group to be in. You know, can you imagine a group where you get, you know, 20, 30 men who are 60, 70, 80, or 90, and they have terminal cancer or some form of cancer, and nobody complains, and it's always a wonderful meeting, and then every once in a while somebody disappears, and they're not drinking, they just die in their sleep or something, or, you know, they go off to hospice or something like that. So that is to say, I've changed from when I was 31 years old to 75. I mean, I'm not apologizing for it. I mean, it just happens. If you stay in here and you work these things, you know, it says in the big book, the way we get a new perspective on things is by repeated humiliations and the final crushing of our self-sufficiency. And I'll clue you in on something, Remember, the carpenter once said, in this world you will have problems, but be of good cheer, I've overcome the world. I'll tell you, there's an interesting thing about living in this world. If you haven't figured it out yet, I'm just going to let you know that that there's going to be pain all along the way. And the world ain't going to stop coming at you. And all those people that disappoint you, they're still around. They ain't going nowhere. You know what I mean? They're not going to change, by the way. It's not going to change. The money's not important. It's just right up there with oxygen. Every problem that you had before you before you stopped drinking, they're all there waiting for you. All the alcoholism and the craziness you had while you were drinking or before you it's all there even afterwards. You're going to be, the suffering ain't going to necessarily stop. All the stuff, it's going to go on and on and on and on. And so you say, what's the point? Well, along the way, if you stay sober and you somehow, some way, I hope I give you some sort of hints. All I'm going to do is talk about my life. I'm not talking about your life, so you don't have to say, well, it's perfectly permissible for you to walk out here and say, man, I don't want what that guy has. You know what I mean? I don't need that crap. I don't believe in any of that stuff. It's permissible. Some of you may keep that attitude. Some of you maybe, 5 or 10 years down the road say, I want to be like that. I want to have that deal. And I guess one of the things that happened with me is when you think a certain way, like an alcoholic that says, I used to say to my spouse used to say, your problem, Russell, is you think everybody should think like you think. And I said, yeah, what's wrong with that? And I said, we'd all be happy, and I'd be king and I'd just issue orders and everybody would just do what I wanted to do. And he said, but you're crazy. He might have been right about that. As a matter of fact, I think he is. And but as you go along and you stick in this thing and you suffer from repeated humiliations, staying sober for almost 44 years, raising 4 kids, being married, staying married, trying to be self-supporting through your own contributions and dealing with the flames and arrows of what goes on in this life and the problems, the cancer, the whole bit, doing all that. What it means is that these repeated humiliations, there's a long road of recovery ahead, long road, What it means is that it doesn't mean I'm better or smarter than anybody else. As a matter of fact, I used to be smart. It's a terrible, terrible handicap. Intelligence. I used to pride myself in my intelligence. I graduated departmental honors in mathematics. I was going for a PhD in algebraic topology. I graduated law school, was division chief. The one thing I knew was I was smarter than anybody else. I was the smartest guy in the room until I destroyed everybody close to me and destroyed myself and wound up in Alcoholics Anonymous. And then I turned to my sponsor the second week and I pointed out on my wall all of my degrees. And he said, well, Russ, rectal thermometers have degrees. You know what they do with those? I didn't impress them at all. They weren't impressed at all. And the only problem was I wanted everything they had and they wanted nothing I had. And I was smart and unhappy and crazy. And like a wave in the ocean, unstable in all my ways. And they were happy, and they were at peace with themselves, and they weren't scared. And they weren't scared of what I thought about them, and they said what's on their mind, and they loved me, and if I wanted to walk away and go, they'd let me do it. They had no problem. They had no problem saying to me, why don't you just go out and drink? There was not, it was very, very simple. I understood, I got it. I got it early on, You do what they tell you to do. I did what I was told to do. There were no suggestions. They may have suggested, but I knew they weren't suggesting. I knew if I wanted their respect and I wanted them to like me and I wanted to stick around with the group, I was going to eventually, maybe not me, but eventually do exactly what I was told to do. And that's the deal. And the great, I want to say, I don't use the word lucky. I use the word blessed. The blessed thing in my life is that for some strange reason, I was attracted to those men. Now, there were women too, but mostly it was the men. I was attracted to those men. Maybe, I don't know, maybe there's a psychological thing. I had a decent father. I went through a divorce. My parents went through a divorce when I was 13, but he wasn't really anybody I was really close to or I could look up to. I didn't have like a father figure, you know. I see a lot of guys in AA that never had father figures that could help them see this is what a man's really like. And my mother was a drunk, you know what I mean? And I loved her, and she loved that my mother was a drunk. So I really got like an AA daddy or daddies in AA. You know, men that I would look up to. Doesn't the book say if you want what we have and you're willing to go to any length to get it, then you're ready to take certain steps. So a lot of this was my desire to be like Bob Sullivan. My desire to be like, you know, Joe Snyder. My desire to be like John Glenn, you know, or Dion, or whatever it is, or Ray O'Keefe. I wanted to be like these people because they had something. There's a line in Alcoholics Anonymous #3, Bill Dotson, the man on the bed, where there's a picture in almost every room I talked about last week where this guy's on this bed on this goofy T-shirt, you know, the old-time T-shirts, and there's Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob. They got the Bible open. And it's a 1935 picture. It's called The Man on the Bed. Actually, it's called Came to Believe, because that's what this whole thing is all about. That's what the big book says. Each alcoholic in his own language and from his own point of view talks about how he developed a relationship with God. So that's what I always talk about. You know, I can talk about the steps. I'll talk. There'll be some steps in here. You know what I mean? But you know, the older I get, the steps sort of become. It's almost like a milkshake. Now, when I first started I've been doing these things for like 40 years. And when I first started doing the steps, I mean, there's nothing wrong with this deal. Nothing wrong with this. I'm not putting this down. I used to travel. A's got its own weird language. And the thing, and it's all, everything that we talk about in AA goes, it says this in our literature too, goes completely opposite to our normal way of thinking. That shouldn't surprise you, right? That shouldn't surprise. I mean, if everything in here bolstered or went along with our normal way of thinking, there'd be guns and knives and we'd be shooting people in here. You know what I mean? Everything we teach in here goes opposite to our normal way of thinking. You know, nobody wants to do this crap. They even says, you know, we insist on hitting bond because nobody's going to do this stuff unless they think their life depends upon it. You know what it says in the big book? I think it says something like this. Correct me if I'm wrong. If a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life would have saved us, we'd be sober a long time ago. You know what they're referring to? Good orderly direction. Do the next right thing. People worship that shit. Now, I'm not putting it down because I went through a phase, one of my phases, it was, you know, God was good orderly direction because that's the best I could do. Some phrase. So you read the big book, like alcoholics always do. You read stuff and you listen to stuff and you try to make it congeal with your way of thinking. You know what I mean? You know, it may be completely the opposite of what they're saying, but you're gonna basically, I'm like everybody else in AA. I'm gonna do everything they tell me to do in AA, except the stuff I don't want to do. You know what I mean? And so I just I take what I like, I leave the rest. That used to be a mantra in AA. Take what you like and leave the rest. Take what you like. What people ultimately don't realize is the stuff you leave is why you drink. You know, that's why people drink. People come back after 9 years, 10 years, 20 years. They come back to me and they say, I'm really going to do the 4th step now. I'm really going to do the 5th step now. I'm really going to do this. I'm going to do it, but I'm doing it really good now. And I said, well, didn't you do that before? I said, yeah. Didn't you do a 4th step? Yeah. Didn't you do a 5th step? Didn't you say? He says, yeah. But you drank. He said, well, yeah. I said, so now you're coming here and asking me your response and you're going to tell me this is what your plan is. You're going to do the same. You're going to do the same stuff you did before, where you drank. And they said, "Well, yeah." I said, "Why don't you tell me what you didn't do? Why don't we talk about what you didn't do? Why don't we talk about the stuff you didn't do because you thought it was too drastic, or you're too arrogant, or you weren't listening? Why don't we work on the stuff you didn't do?" You know, let's talk about God. Alcoholics don't like God. They don't like the God thing. Listen, I'm not trying to diagnose you or anything like that. You guys are probably completely different. I can tell you guys are extremely spiritual. I can get that. But, you know, I'm just going by the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which I believe is true. I believe what they say. They say if a mere code of morals and a better philosophy of life would have saved us, we'd be we'd be well a long time ago, but it didn't save us. We had to find a power by which we could live. Most people don't really think about having a power by which they can live or even understand the difference between finding a power by which... Most people don't know the difference between the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous and something else called the Fellowship of the Spirit. The Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, the only requirement for membership is the desire to stop drinking. It doesn't even have to be an honest desire. They used to say honest desire, but that was too high a bar. You know, you just have a bad Saturday night and say, I got to stop this thing. So you walk into an AA room, and you're welcome. You say, I want to stop drinking. And that's the deal. But the Fellowship of the Spirit, which is only mentioned on the last page, you will surely be with us, some of us, when you meet us on the Fellowship of the Spirit. The Fellowship of the Spirit comes from a book of the Bible called Corinthians, where the Apostle Paul talks the fellowship of the Holy Spirit. It's different. It's a different deal. It's mentioned on the page where they talk about, but we will not know you. And then they say, we're not in charge of that. God is in charge of that. So your real reliance has to be on him. You have to utterly abandon yourself to him. When you wake in the morning, you ask him to direct your thinking. He will show you how to create the fellowship you crave. And the fellowship you crave, based upon that, is a godly fellowship. And then it says, see to it your relationship with him is right, and great events will come to pass for you and countless others. You will be with us in the fellowship of the Spirit. Those are the people that are in the fellowship of the Spirit are trudging the road to happy destiny. You're not even sure what happy destiny is unless you get to that deal. You know, and you know what it says in chapter to the Gnostics? What it says is this. Correct me if I'm wrong. It says we had to find a power by which we could live. Everybody find in here. Let me tell you what you get. Walking through the doors, just because you're an idiot. You know what I mean? And you walk through the doors and you want to stop drinking, you get a power by which you could stop drinking. You get that. Everybody gets that. You know, how much time do you have? 88 days? What did you say?
70.
70 days. He got it. What's your first name again? Diego got a power by which you could stop drinking. But you know what happens when you stop drinking? You're still alive on the planet and you still got the same brain. You still got the same brain that's saying things, I can't believe this crap is happening to me. Why is it always happening to me? You still got the same brain where you're driving around in the car or you're showering and all of a sudden you hear this voice that says, I'm such a piece of shit, I ought to kill myself. I'm such a loser. You still have the same brain that tells you, I don't give a crap what other people think about me. I don't give a crap what they think about me. Usually after you've been thinking about what other people might be thinking about you for about 6 hours. You still got the same brain that tells you that you're spiritual, but every time something happens to you materially, you go crazy. You still got the delusional mind. You know, that's the delusional mind. You know what it is? We're delusional. We can't separate the truth from the false. We can't separate the truth from the false. Our alcoholic life and thinking seems the only normal one. And so the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous says simply this. It says we had to find a power not only by which we could stop drinking, but a power by which we could live. Because if you don't die, you're going to be alive a long time. And if you're married, you're going to be alive with a wife that disrespects you. Sometimes you can be alive with a boss that treats you like shit. You're going to be alive with a lot of crappy things going on in the world. You're going to be alive in traffic jams where you're saying, I can't believe this is happening to me, and there's 10,000 cars in the jam. It's not just you. You're going to be alive in this world, and you're going to suffer the same crap that you suffered from and the same dis-ease you had, but now you don't have the drinking to fix that. You know, all you have is the anger and the resentment and the depression and the self-pity and feeling like a victim. So that's where you try to get the power by which you could live. And then it says in the big book, of course, we had to talk about God. That's what it says in the bit. It says, of course, we have to talk about God. Of course, we have to talk about God. I know there's people in the rooms that run around all over the place, police in the rooms and telling people, if you talk about God, you're killing people. I know what the book says. I know what they say in the book. I know what they say in all the literature. And I know who makes it and who doesn't make it. I know who's living a life of joy. You know, what they talk about. joy, not happiness, joy. I know about the 12-step deal, and, we live a life of joy, joyous living. I know about that, but and I because one of the things that happens to you got to understand the way I look at things. When you're 5 years sober, you may sponsor people. I've always been sponsoring people. Doing it. When you're 5 years sober and sponsoring people, you talk to people with 3 years and 2 years. Maybe 4 years. And when you're 10 years sober, you talk to people with 7 years and 8 years and 5 years and 3 years and 2 years. And when you're 20 years sober, you're talking to people that have 15 years. You're always talking and trying to guide people that have less time than you. When you're 40 years, you've got guys calling you up who are suicidal that got 30 years and they're going to meetings. You're talking to guys that have 30 years, make millions of dollars, and they're going out of their head. And so what happens is, my sponsor used to say, when a man with experience meets a man with money, the man with experience will walk away with the money, and the man with the money will walk away with an experience. So when you're dealing constantly with people that have 15, 20, 25, 30 years, and they're going to meetings, and they're sponsoring people, nothing so much ensures sobriety, but intensive, and they're working, and they're doing service, and they're going to meetings, and they call you up, and they're lonely. It says here and there in the book, here and there, once in a while, an alcoholic, a person who used to be a drinker, he says, feel better, look better, we're having a better time. He says, we laugh at such style. We know he's going to try presently the old game again because he's not happy with his sobriety. Soon he'll try the old game again because he's not happy with his sobriety. He'll know loneliness as few do. He'll be at the jumping off place. So what happens is when you deal with people that are going to meetings and are not drinking and are sponsoring people and presumably working the steps, and they're unhappy, and they're not being rocketed in the fourth dimension of existence. There's part of the book that says you were rocketed in the fourth dimension of existence. You've experienced much of heaven, and you know peace. And the great fact is this and nothing less, that God has become the central fact of your life, and you're convinced that he lives in your heart and mind in a way which is indeed miraculous, doing for you what you can't do for yourself. And it happens as a result of the great fact. When you're dealing with people that are doing supposedly everything in AA, and they're not happy, and sometimes they drink. Sometimes they got 22 years and they drink, or 30 years and they drink. When you do that, when you see that all the time, and you go to a meeting and some guy says, well, the reason people don't drink, the reason people drink, and you hear a guy says, well, I drank because I stopped going to meetings, you know that that's not the reason he drank. You know that that's not the reason he drank. When he says, I drank because I stopped. Now, all that may happen. You may along the way stop going to meetings, but the real question is, why did he stop going to meetings? And he stopped going to meetings because meetings aren't doing anything for him. You don't stop doing something if it's helping you. He's not going to meetings because the meetings aren't doing anything for him. The old life is doing something for him. The chasing after women, the chasing after men, the getting money. That's doing something for him. There's no more attraction in here. The thing that's missing, in every case, whether you stop going to meetings, whether you drink, no matter where it is, the thing that's missing is the stuff they talk about that alcoholics don't want to do. Because half measures do avail you nothing. You see, when you read half measures avail you nothing, I don't know what you think half measures are. When I read half measures avail you nothing, I know it has to do with you don't have an abiding conviction, you haven't utterly abandoned yourself to God. Now, you think alcoholics want to hear that? They want to hear don't drink and go to meetings. They want to hear you need to sponsor more people. They want to hear all that other stuff. That's what they want to hear. You understand what I'm saying? They don't want to hear God. And you know how I know they don't want to hear it? And this isn't coming from me. This is from the Big Book. Because in the Big Book, in chapter of the agnostics, chapter of the people that don't want to believe in God or want to stay on the fence in God, and you know what they say about that? Half measures avail you nothing. We stood at the turning point. He's everything or he's nothing. You know what Dr. Bob said when Clarence the brewmaster asked him, he said, "What do you believe in God?" He says, "What does that have to do with it?" He said, "Everything. Everything." They used to have you get down on your knees. That was the whole deal. What the bottom line is that you ultimately realize that what you think you're reading in the Big Book is not what the big book is saying. And then you read the big book, the part of the big book, I don't know, I can't even remember what I thought when I read it. I mean, really, I can't put my play. First of all, I got Alzheimer's, I'm senile. But if you asked me, can you remember how you thought about this thing in 3 years or 5? I can't. All I can remember is how I am right now. You know, and I'm just being honest with you and telling. That's why I don't need notes. You know, if you're honest with people, and and so the bottom line is, you're sitting there, and you're saying, when you read in the big book, when I read in the big book, this is the way I read it. When I read in the big book, of course, then we're going to talk about God. And then the next statement was, here's when the hackles and the necks of alcoholics stand up and they get angry. What I read the big book saying is, alcoholics don't want to talk about God and they don't like people talking about God. And I can see that in the meetings. It's not in the program. It's not in the big book. It's not anywhere in there. It's not in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's not your program, my program. It's a program. And in the program, it says this is a drastic program. It's on page 42. It says on page 42. Just go. If you read it the way I read it, and the only way I learned how to read it this way is I had to go through the pain of trying this thing in the middle of the road, with wearing a wetsuit without getting wet. And this is what it says. 2 members of Alcoholics Anonymous came to see me. They grinned, which I didn't like so much, and then asked me if I thought myself an alcoholic and if I was really licked. I had to concede both propositions. They piled on me heaps of evidence. I had exhibited in Washington. It was a hopeless condition. They cited cases. The process snuffed out the last flicker of conviction that I could do the job myself. Then they outlined the spiritual answer and program of action. Then they outlined the spiritual answer and program of action. You want to know about the program of action? Here's the program of action. It's right on page 42. Then they outlined the spiritual answer and program of action, which 100 of them had followed successfully. If you want to know what they were really doing, read Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers. I'm going to go through that in the workshop on Saturday. Dr. Bob, you read that book and you'll find out what they were really doing between 1935 and 1937. Had nothing to do with AA today. I'm just telling you. You don't have to buy into it. Though I had been only a nominal churchman, their proposals were not intellectually hard to swallow. Well, simple but not easy. But the program of action, here we go, though entirely sensible, this isn't me talking. You don't like it, call up New York, tell them to take it out, was pretty drastic. Some of you might say, you're thinking, man, that guy's fucking drastic. It's drastic shit. This is like over the top. You think this is over the top? The disease of alcoholism is over the top. The disease of alcoholism is drastic. That's what drastic. Your brain is screwed, tattooed, it's all over for you. You have a chronic disease. It's chronic. You know what that means? That means it's incurable, even if you're not drinking. Even if you're working this program, it's incurable. Even if you're sober 30 years. One thing I never say, I used to say all the time, is I'm spiritual. Alcoholics say shit like that to make themselves feel better. We're delusional. We say things like, I don't care what other people think about me, I'm spiritual, not material, I'm not religious, and all that sort of stuff, until the IRS drains their bank account. Until they lose their license to practice law and medicine. Until the wife leaves. Until something happens to really rock their material world, and then all of a sudden they're not too spiritual anymore. But they like to tell themselves lies. They like to lie to themselves because they can't separate. Truth is, I'm like the Madonna of AA. I'm a material man. I'm a material boy. You can't blame a girl for trying. You know what I mean? All I think about is the money. You know what our book says? You know how you stop that deal? It says as you awake in the morning, we awake in the morning. You know what it says we do? We ask God to direct our thinking. We ask God to direct our thinking. He gave us brains to use, but he didn't give us brains for us to use. He gave us brains so he could use them. Otherwise, why would we ask him to direct our thinking? We ask him to direct our thinking because we wake up in the morning and say, I can't believe I have to do this crap again, or how can I get that girl, or how can I get laid, or how can I get this one? He didn't bring us brains for us to use. He gave us brains for him to use, but if he's not in your life, you're going to start using your brain. And you know what's going to happen? And it says it's chronic, it's progressive. You know what progressive means? It gets worse over a period of time, never gets better. So I'll tell you what, your faith better catch up to this disease and overtake it. You know, you can't rest on your laurels. You're headed for trouble if you do. You start reading this book a little bit differently. You know how you read it, I think? In a drastic way. Not in a comfortable way. Not in a complacent way. But the program of action, though entirely sensible, was pretty drastic. It meant I would have to throw several lifelong conceptions out the window. Get rid of your old ideas, and the result is nil unless you let go. But how do you know what the result? How do you know what your old ideas are? It was not easy, but the moment I made up my mind to go through the process, I had the curious feeling that my alcohol condition was relieved. In fact, it proved to be. So I want to tell you a little bit of a story, and I'm going to try to see whether I can get this to sound like a fourth-step meeting. You think I can do it? You think I can do it? How is he going to get this into a foot? You know, what happens is I see things a little differently. I've connected the dots. You know, over a period of time, I've connected the dots. And you know, when I look at the fourth step, you know what I see? I see the second step. I see the sixth step. The sixth step is one that separates the men from the boys. What do you think about that now? You know what it says in the big book? It says there are boys, and then there are men. What's the difference? You know what the sixth step says the difference is? You're going to be shocked at this. It says the men are those who are trying to grow in the image and likeness of God. Surprise, surprise. God, you know the thing that people tell you, don't talk about God because you're killing newcomers? You're killing newcomers if you don't talk about God. You know? But I'll tell you one thing, if you don't talk about God in AA, you're playing into the disease and you're making it a lot more comfortable for people. And alcoholics like to make it comfortable for people. You know why? Because they're all scared. Alcoholics are incredibly scared of what other people think about them. And so, you know, it says our motives are usually mixed. We think we do virtuous motives, but 90% of the time, as you're talking to a newcomer or anything, what's really in the back of your mind is I don't want this guy not to like me. We think we're doing it to make it easy on him, and what we're doing is we're lowering him into the grave. We're not telling him to shut. We're not saying things to him like, how old are you, John? Well, I'm 50. I said, when the fuck are you going to grow up? We don't want to say things like that to him, right? Because that may shock the shit out of them. They may leave us and gossip about us to other people and say, that guy Russell's an asshole, you know? And maybe that guy needs someone in his life to tell him that. Why don't you grow the hell up? You're 50 years old, you're still a thumb-sucking crybaby. You're still hurting people. All you do is think about yourself. No, what we say is we want to be very nice and kind to people. We don't want to ever hurt them or anything like that because we love them, you know? When what we really love is ourselves. Self-centered to the extreme, codependent to the extreme. I'm not saying this is always the case. It's a generality. All generalities are bad, including this one. You know, so the bottom line is, you know what I remember? When I used to do the four-step, what I would do, and there's nothing wrong with this, because I don't understand these steps. They go counter. I don't, you know, the spiritual axiom is about the inventory. It says, whenever you're disturbed, no matter what the cause, this is our spiritual axiom. This is the absolute truth. This is what they say, and this is the thing that saved my life. Whenever we're disturbed, no matter what the cause, there's something wrong with us. Whenever we're disturbed, no matter what the cause, there's something wrong with you. So if you're sitting there and I'm disturbing you, you got a problem. I don't have a problem. You have a problem. You know, unless you understand. Now, what I used to think is whenever I'm disturbed, no matter what the cause, there's something wrong with you. I was a victim. Why does this always happen to me? Who the hell you think you are? You don't know who the hell you're talking to. This is a bunch of bullshit. I'll show you. You know, you don't know who you're dealing with. There's something. I was a victim. Every day there was bullshit happening to me that I didn't deserve because people are assholes and nobody's telling the truth and it's all bullshit. You're bullshit. He's bullshit. The world is bullshit. My boss is bullshit. I'm full of shit. You know what I mean? It's a crummy. Until I get to the bar. Take a couple of zaps of that stuff, you know? I was a nothing. I was always going to be a nothing. I used to put a little something in my body. I turned into an almost. When you're nothing, almost is top of the world. And I was a nothing. So I started out, so what I used to do with the 4-step is I would open up the book and I would show you the chart. I would tell you how I got to the 4-step, how I first bought. I mean, I have a whole story. This is what I think. I do a story. This is what I made the 4-step. This is how I got to the 4-step. This is how I do it. I go through the 4 lists. I go through the chart in the big book. How I did this, list of resentments, why I resented them, how it affected me, disregarding that deal, where was I at fault? Then I'd share my list of fears and everything like that. I'd go through the whole list, which is perfectly okay, especially if you've never done the steps. You go through and you say, oh, so that's how you do it. List of resentments, list of this and list of that. You understand what I'm saying? But one of the things I recognized 2 things, that as I grew older in AA and more mature, I didn't only see the 4-step, I started seeing the underlying importance of the 4-step and why people who do you know, this is like a shocker, did you know there are people that do the 4-step and drink? Okay. It's true. Do you know there are people that do the 5th step and drink? You know there are people that are 22 years sobriety and they do all the steps and they can do it and they drink? Well, there's something else going on here that you ought to think about. Next time you see somebody, they say they drank after 10 years, 5 years after. Did you do 4 steps? Yeah, I did a lot of 4. Did you do 5? Yeah, I did the 5th steps. Why did you drink? I stopped going to meetings. Why did you stop going to meetings? I don't know. There may be something. So what happened is time went by and I start working with all these people. And I went through the same stuff myself because I hit a second bottom myself. You start realizing that and you get a glimpse of what the problem is. And you'll never believe what the problem is. They haven't abandoned themselves to God. The problem is the thing they don't want to talk about in AA. So here, I start off with the 4-step, and I think that everybody owes me amends, and I never did anything wrong, and I'm constantly being screwed, And I think I'm God's gift to whatever, and it's just bad breaks and misunderstanding, and by the time I'm done with the 5th step, I can't believe what a jerk I am, and how I hurt so many people, and I ruined so many lives, and, how am I going to get out of this thing? Then comes the 8th and 9th step. So my entire attitude changes. It's a good thing. But why do I think of the 2nd step? Here's the problem. The 2nd step says we're insane. A lot of people don't know that, or they don't accept that. They don't think they're insane because they're making a lot of money, because they're bright in their field, because they're world-class stars, because they won an Oscar, and they end up ODing and dying, or because of all, they look around at all the material things and everything, and they don't realize they're insane, because how can I be insane? Everybody loves me, look how much money I'm making, look at the car I'm driving, look at who I am, you know what I mean? How can I be insane? But what happens is, somewhere along the line, if you're lucky, you get humble enough, maybe alcohol beats you down, where you buy in to the idea that you're crazy, that you are certifiable crazy. That over any period of time, your best thinking on your best. My sponsor used to say, he didn't even graduate the 6th grade. He said, Russell, your best thinking on your best day got you in here in the first place. And they convinced me that it was true. That somehow, some way, I'm a smart guy in a lot of ways, but when my emotions or fear or whatever it is that happens in my brain gets involved, it twists everything around and I end up not giving back the money or yelling at my wife or doing something stupid or hurting people. It just happens. So what happens is, the way I read in the 2nd step is, what I see with people and what I see with myself is we get to a point where we're sober a few years, maybe a few months, maybe a few years. My sponsor used to say, the problem with alcoholics, they get too well too fast. They get too well too fast. So we're now picking up our 3rd year, our 4th year, our 5th year, our 6th year, and we're no longer insane. We're not insane. I mean, I've got 20 years sobriety. I'm married. I'm making money. I'm going to meetings. I'm not insane anymore. We feel that I'm not insane. Well, what am I? I'm spiritual. I'm spiritual now. I've been cured. I know we say because this is what we're supposed to say, we're never cured, but we pretty much think we've been cured. And I deal with people who believe they've been cured. They don't know they're insane. I swear, I deal with them all the time. I can tell immediately. I have a gift of discernment. I can tell when somebody realizes they're insane because they call me up with a problem. And they say, I got a problem. Can I speak to you? And they talk to me about their problem. And I recognize do you think it's possible to have somebody talk, and because I've been through it myself or I've seen it happen, that I know the answer immediately? And they talk to me about their problem. And then they repeat themselves. And they repeat themselves. And they say, no, you got to listen to this. It's a problem with a person or a place or a thing. And then I finally say, depending upon how patient I can actually be with this shit, I say, hey, Ralph, listen. You've been thinking a lot about this stuff, haven't you? He says, yeah, how'd you know? I said, I get it. I said, listen, I have the answer for you. And he says, really? He says, yeah. I said, here's what you need to do. Here's your problem. And I get 3 words out of my mouth, and he says, no, you don't understand. And then I say, no, I do understand. Let me tell you. He says, no, I got more. Then he starts talking more about the guy or the gal or the whatever it is or the life. He wants to fight for the right to explain to me that he is right and I am wrong. And he's got 20 years. And the reason he's doing that is because he is right, because because he's spiritual, because he's okay. He doesn't know, because when you're insane, you don't know you're insane. It's like talking to a guy who's in denial about the drinking and trying to convince him he's a drinker when he hasn't been convinced. He hasn't taken the first step. He's got 20 years, and in his mind, he's perfectly okay. It's his wife. He wants to divorce his wife. He says, I don't love her anymore. I said, well, why don't you love her? He says, no. He says, just love her. He says, no, but you don't understand. You've been married 20 years. You got 3 kids. I'm going to divorce her because I don't love her anymore. I said, well, just love her. And he says, no, you're not listening to me. I don't love her. I said, I know. I heard what you said. Just love her. He says, I don't understand. He says, you're not listening to me. I don't love her. Well, I heard you. Just love her. And he looks at me like I'm crazy, and he's got 20 years sobriety. I said, listen to me. Love isn't a feeling. Love is a decision. Why, instead of being a thumbs up and crybaby and a selfish piece of shit, why don't you just love her anyway? Love is not, unconditional love is not, I love you as long as you're nice to me. I love my children, and sometimes they do things, I'd still love them. Why don't you just love her? Well, you see, it doesn't, because they're not sober. They're not drinking, but they're not sober. That's the deal. So 3 stories, real fast, in 5 minutes, then we'll get out of here, okay? So I get a call one day from a gal. I'm on relay for 8 years. For 8 years, I was on relay. If you called up Alcoholics Anonymous, you got me. So nobody got sober during that period of time. I want to talk, and then what they want to do is they want to talk. They're drunk and they want to talk to you for 8 hours. So I get a call from a gal one night around 1 o'clock in the morning. And it's a gal, and she's got a PhD in nursing. I didn't even know you get a PhD in it, but you can. She's got a PhD in nursing, runs a whole thing and everything, Jackson Memorial, whatever the heck it is. And she's got a little child. She's a single mother. And she says to me this, and she's a very bright gal. She says, listen to me. He says, I'm under, the, whatever that thing is. I forgot. If there's a nurse in here, the thing where they supervise you, you can't drink and everything like that. She got caught. And she says, if they catch me drinking, I'm going to lose my lights. I'll lose my kid. I'll lose this. I can't drink. I need help. I need you to help me because I had a drink the other day and I'm really scared. Would you help? Can you? I said, sure. I have no problem. He says, there's only one thing I got to tell you. I said, I need you to help me, but I don't want to hear anything about Alcoholics Anonymous. And she's sober. She's as sober as you guys are. She's got a PhD in nursing. And I said, well, we got just 2 problems. He said, what's the 2 problems? He says, well, first problem is I'm 8 years sober, and I got sober with Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's why I got sober. I mean, that's how I got sober. I go to AA meetings, I got a sponsor, and I don't know what plan B is. And she says, well, what's the second problem? I said, you called Alcoholics Anonymous. This PhD in nursing, So don't tell me alcoholics aren't crazy. Second, I was 8 years sober. I had a friend named John, wonderful guy. Some of you guys might have known him. Great guy, I loved him. One day he comes up to me and he says, Russell, he says, 8 years sober. I've done all the steps 3 times over. I'm teaching the steps. I'm doing these step series, okay? I know the steps. So I'm 8 years sober. It wouldn't have mattered whether I was 20 years sober. The thing is, it's the same deal. And John says to me, he says, hey, Russ, I'll meet you at this delicatessen that we used to go to. I forgot the name of it. I'll meet you at delicatessen at 5 o'clock. Let's eat, or 6 o'clock, and then let's go to the meeting over at Sabal Palm, wherever the hell we're going. I said, sure. So I go over to the restaurant. I sit there. He never shows up. I go to the meeting. There's John. I said, John, I was at the restaurant. You never showed up. He says, yeah, something came up. Sorry. So he says, but I'll tell you what. I'll meet you there tomorrow at 6 o'clock. You know what I mean? And then we'll go over to, the Carl Gables group. And we'll have, he says, okay, great. So I show up at the Carl Gables group. I show up at the restaurant. He doesn't show up. I go to the Carl Gables group. He's there. He says, John, I was at the dinner. We were supposed to meet. You weren't there. He says, oh, yeah, I something came up. I had to do something else. And so he says, but I'll tell you what. Don't get ahead of me here. Yeah, I tell you what. He says, we can go to the such and such group, the Sunset group tomorrow night, and that'd be a great group. And so I was speaking and everything, and I'll meet you down the road at the such and such place. He says, okay, fine. So I go there, and you're not gonna believe this. He doesn't show up. He doesn't show up. So I go up to the meeting. I said, John, I was there. You didn't show up. He says, oh yeah, I couldn't make it. Something else happened. So now you're going to find this hard to believe. I have a little bit of resentment against John. So I go see Dane Carell. Do you remember Dane Carell? Dane Carell had like 45 years at the time. And he was sober and sane. And I had 8 years, and I was a basket case, but I didn't know it because I've got 8 years, and I sponsored 2 million people, and I'm doing the steps all over the place, and everybody's telling me how much I helped them. So I realized that I had reached the point of being spiritual, not religious. And so I realized that I was not insane. And so when you realize you're not insane, you can then judge other people. And you say, because it's clear that John is wrong. He is so wrong. If you don't know he's wrong, you're alky stupid. You deserve to die because you're so stupid. He is wrong. So I go up to Dan Carell and I tell him the whole story I just told you about John and what he did and how he did. And John, and all about John and the whole John thing, you know what I mean? And I'm just heated. I can't believe it. And so Dane looks at me and he says, and then he spends the next 20 minutes beating the living shit out of me. Because he had to beat me up because all I want to do is talk about John, and he just beat the crap out of me. I'm fighting for my right. You don't understand. He's beating me up. Because all he wanted to know, which I couldn't tell him because I didn't know the answer, is why I showed up the second time. He didn't want to talk about John. He wanted to know why did you, listen, you do shit like that, you'll wind up in Al-Anon. It's like a fake worse than death, you know what I mean? You'll stay in a toxic marriage for 2 million years, you know what I mean? You'll run into a burning house, and you'll do such stupid things. He wanted to know why I showed up the second time. And I don't do that these days. I'm not a really good battered wife. I don't make a good battered wife. You know what I mean? I don't suffer fools. And the bottom line is, and then I said, but what about John? Then he would finally talk to me. He says, well, he's not sober. I said, no, he's sober. He's got 11 years. He picked up a medallion. He says, Russell, he's not sober. I said, I'm telling you, he's sober. He picked up. I said, Russell, sober people don't do things like that. And 2 years later, he drank. John was drinking. And I found out that during that period of time, he had seen a psychiatrist and he was popping Xanax. Just like Bill Wilson was doing at 21 years, popping LSD, he was popping Xanax. Not drinking it, just using Xanax. Which was the drug of the deal during that period of time. Dane Carell knew that I was 8 years sober and crazy. I didn't know I was crazy. I didn't understand. You see, I thought I had graduated. I didn't understand that the second step, I know it says in the book, you know what it says in the book? It says, oh wait, here's the line. Let me see the line. It says, in the promises, it says this shit, and we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol, for by this time sanity will have returned. Right? Does that make you feel good? Fucking lie from this pit of hell. You know what I mean? Let me tell you something. Yes, sanity returns, but it can leave again. It can leave again. You want to know why people drink? Even after 20 years? Because they're insane. If an alcoholic lifts up a glass to drink after 20 years sobriety, going to meetings or not going to meetings, he's not drinking because he craves alcohol. He's not drinking because he was drinking and he can't stop drinking. He's drinking because he's back to being insane again. And unless you somehow realize that, and one of the things the fourth step does, at the end of the fourth step, if it does anything, if the fourth and fifth step does anything, going through the fourth step, looking at your life, looking how you've hurt other people, talk to somebody else, because even in the height of your insanity, you could even do a fourth step and not realize a lot of the stuff that you need to realize. So you need at least one other person saying, no, you're missing the point. You really were crazy there. No, you don't know on men's there, but you owe on men's there. By the time, when you get past the fifth step, one of the things you realize, you start seeing things clearly. You understand? And you realize how crazy you were and how you hurt people. You may even feel a tinge of guilt, which sort of gets you into the eighth and ninth step. You start realizing, man, I can't believe I did that. Can't believe I walked out on my wife and young child at that time, who was a decent gal and everything, because I wanted to go out with other women. If you asked me why I left my first wife and child, I'd say, well, we were different persons. She didn't understand me. And by the time I was done my fifth stop, I realized how insane and crazy I was. But here's the problem. I understood how insane and crazy I was. 5 years later, I'm spiritual, not religious. I'm wonderful. The insanity can come back unless you somehow, some way, can figure out some way of constantly understanding you're crazy. Now, if you ask me today, and this is just my feelings, it doesn't have to be yours. If you ask me, if you say, you're a good guy, Russ, I said, no, I'm an evil son of a bitch. I'm an asshole. I am a self-centered. I know exactly who I am. I have no delusions who I am. Left to my own devices, I would fuck everybody in this room financially. I wouldn't give a crap about anybody except myself. If you see anything that looks attractive or decent to me, in me, anything, it has nothing to do with me, because I know who I am. It has to do with my faith in God. Has to do with my faith in God. That's what it's all about. It's about looking at God and understanding who God is, not the concept of God. Well, I understand but who God is, and knowing how woefully short you fall from who He is, and trying to every day act in such a way so He would be proud of you. You have to constantly walk around. Listen, I'm not even saying as an alcoholic, as a human being, understanding how left to your own devices in your own head, you'll turn out being selfish and self-centered. You'll turn out hurting people. And I don't know, you may not be able to do the fourth step every second of the day, and you're probably not going to do it. And every once in a while you go to meetings, and if you hear somebody say something to you, or you have a sponsor that you don't like, you'll probably turn them off and walk away. But I can tell you something. There's a reason why it's so important. There's a reason why it says in the big book, on many different, burn the idea into the alcoholic's mind that he can, as long as he believes in God. There's a reason why it talks about there is one who has all power, that one is God, may you find him now. There is a reason why they emphasize the God thing. The men, because somehow, if you develop faith, one of the things you can see is you can see yourself clearly. You can understand who and what you are. Now, you may think, but by understanding how bad I could be and how bad I was and who I really am, you may think it depresses me. It doesn't depress me at all. Because I also know with God's help, I don't have to be that way. I don't have to be that way. I don't have to run a life of fear. I don't have to worry about what you think about me. You know what I mean? As long as I focus on Him. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much.